Yeah, because
no, because we've already been doing
Boris isn't a big.
And you filled yours out already?
Do I need to fill that out?
No, it's all...
Absolutely. Okay. Not bad. How are you? Good. See here on my list.
Hi there.
Я говорю, що ще
Oh, this is a good information.
She said, usually I wouldn't go to anybody.
але якщо вони складуть свій сценарій, наприклад, сьогодні вечором, має бути так, як
Mask, get over here. Mind you, I think Massimo didn't sign because he was canoeing up north somewhere or something. It was by accident. I'm not sure if it was a matter of principle. But,
Of course, I gotta put you in the middle.
okay.
Well, thank you all very much for coming. I think, though, if we think back to a year ago, and I know many of you were here a year ago, I don't think we realized back then, or at least I didn't realize, how important this event would be this year. Every time I come out of one of those conversations, I come out with the sentiment that people are ready and willing to do the work that needs to be done over the next 4 years to fight that next election campaign, which is fantastic. What's interesting is that the first battle, the first important battle, I would argue, for the Liberal Party is in Etobicoke Centre. It's not 4 years away. It's within the next year. This is a battle that will be important, and I hope that all of you will be there to support Boris, not just because it's Boris, and not only because you support the work that he's done in the past, but because the Liberal Party will need that support as well. So we have with us a number of special guests, and I'd just like to take a moment, if I may, to introduce them. We have with us Massimo Pacetti. He is the MP for Saint-Léonard Saint-Michel, and he has come all the way from Quebec, Montreal, all the way from Montreal. So please give him a warm welcome. There's a few other. I'd like to introduce a few other folks, and then we'll ask Massimo to come up and say a few words. Yeah, a few other guests with us. First of all, we have Gerard Kennedy, who's a former MP in Parkdale High Park. To my left. We have Andrew Telegdi, the former MP in Kitchener-Waterloo. We have Janko Peric, the former MP in Cambridge. We have with us also Jim Karagianis, who is the MP for Scarborough Aging Court and the Liberal critic for multiculturalism. Mubarak Ahmed, who's the president of Toronto Region for Liberal Party of Canada, Ontario. Paul Sipala, who's the financial administrator at LPCO at the Liberal Party of Canada, Ontario. Our Etobicoke Centre Federal Liberal Riding Association is led by Jim O'Rourke, and I'd now like to ask Jim, if he would, to come up and say a few words.
Thank you, Yvonne. Thank you all for being here this evening. Your continuing strong support for Boris and the association is greatly appreciated. Last year, as we kicked off the 2011 campaign, one of our guests was a former parliamentarian, and he spoke briefly, and when he got off I said, "You didn't talk about the time in your first election in 1979 when you won by 74 votes. And both him and I then mentioned how tough the 2011 election was going to be in Etobicoke Centre. What I wanted to say to you is we have a wonderful team, Boris's team. We have to increase that team. We need every one of you in the upcoming by-election. We need you to talk to your family and friends and neighbors. We have to increase that team in order to secure a victory for Boris. Boris is the hardest working, most dedicated, most effective member of Parliament. It is time that the voters of Etobicoke Centre return him to the House of Commons. Ladies and gentlemen, would you please welcome our great champion of the integrity of the democratic process, Boris.
Thank you, Jim. Thank you, Ivan. And let me begin by once again thanking Ms. Miroslava Oleksiuk for so graciously providing her spectacular backyard for this annual Canada Week barbecue. Thank you, Miroslava. And there's a number of people that I have to thank for the hard work that was put into organizing this event. Over the past couple of weeks, there's one person in particular that's gone above and beyond to make sure that this event is the success that it is today. Now, I'd also like to thank Marika Stadnik and her volunteers for helping out in the organization, especially with the ticket sales. Her team of Marika Shkambara, Irene Fedevich. Thank you so much, ladies, for all of your hard work. And of course, all the volunteers that have guaranteed that everything runs so smoothly this evening. And there's someone, once again, I'd like to thank in particular, and that's Jerry and Gina, who are behind the bar right now. And I have to tell you a little story. I found out that Gina was on jury duty. And I don't know how, but somehow she convinced the court that she had to have this day off to help organize the setup. So they adjourned, I understand, for today, and I'm not quite sure that's a good thing. And if someone takes a picture of you, of what you're doing.
I told him it was for you, and he said, okay.
Thank you, Gina. Now, I'd also like to mention a few other people that are going to be very important in the battles that we'll be facing in the next little while. John Raz, who's the campaign chair, and I understand had to leave a little bit earlier, but he was here earlier. And Luch Durante, who's going to be the campaign manager during this by-election campaign. And finally, I'd like to mention two gentlemen who've played an incredibly important role in getting us to this point. You see, a year ago, when I realized that something had gone terribly wrong during the election in Etobicoke Centre, when I realized that the integrity of our electoral process had potentially been undermined, I went to a number of experts, people who'd spent their whole life working in the political process. And when I approached them, every one of them said, you know, Boris, there's not much we can do. We're going to have to roll with it. And I just couldn't accept it. It was so fundamentally wrong. And in fact, I almost felt that there was an even greater burden on my shoulders. Because this is our democracy. We could not come to terms that our democratic process in Canada would be undermined and nothing would be done about it. So I turned to a good friend of mine, Stephen Teal. Now, Stephen Stephen Teal, who's the past president of the Progressive Conservative Riding Association in Etobicoke Centre, absolutely agreed that we have to take this on. There is no way that we could allow this to stand. And then he brought on board his close colleague, Gavin Tighe. And over this past year, we have fought a very complex and difficult battle to help restore the integrity of Canada's democracy. And we have a very big battle ahead of us in 2 weeks' time, where we'll be arguing before the Supreme Court of Canada. We'll be making history. I especially want to thank the team of Gavin and Stephen for everything that they have done to help restore Canadian democracy. Thank you, gentlemen. Friends, a year ago, if someone had asked, is it possible that in Canada a political party would engage in vote suppression tactics that would target particular demographics so as to disenfranchise people, multicultural communities, to take away their right to vote? All of us would have said, no, no. That sort of thing doesn't happen in our country. A year ago, if somebody had asked, is it possible that in Canada groups would engage in organized attempts to stuff ballot boxes? It would have been laughable. Of course not. Not in our country. Not in our Canada. Today, if those two questions were put to any Canadian, every one of us would have a discomfort. We'd feel it in the pit of our stomachs. And most likely with a combination of sorrow and some anger, we would say, yes, it happened. It happened on May 2nd in 2011. On May 2nd of 2011, during the last federal election campaign, something broke. There was a breaking of the trust between the Canadian electorate and the Conservative Party of Harper. And I call it the Conservative Party of Harper because any political party that engages in taking away that fundamental right of every Canadian, taking away Canadians' right to vote, that sort of party is not working on behalf of the interests of the Canadian electorate and the Canadian people. That party is working on behalf of the interests of one man, Mr. Harper. And 2 weeks ago, an electoral emergency nomination meeting was called in Etobicoke Centre. And there were a number of locations that this nomination meeting could have happened in Etobicoke Centre, but I was adamant that it take place at St. Demetrius Ukrainian Canadian Seniors Residence. There was a symbolic reason that it had to take place there. You see, a year ago, something happened at St. Demetrius Seniors Residence that should never have happened in our Canada. According to the sworn affidavits of all 3 Elections Canada officials who worked there that day. First, there was a Conservative scrutineer that went through the whole building and removed the vote reminder cards on every senior's door. And let me read to you from the sworn affidavit of the DRO who worked the poll at St. Demetrius Seniors Residence. And was it just at St. Demetrius that this occurred in Etobicoke Centre? After the election, we found out that no, there was another location, an apartment building. And it happens to be an apartment building where most of the residents are new Canadians, many of whom are from Ukraine, Albania. New Canadians who are building their first home in that building. Unlike the seniors' residence, where the incident took place in the morning, the seniors had had breakfast and they lined up to vote, and that's when this outrage occurred. This one happened at the end of the day, when all these new Canadians were coming back from work. They were lined up in the basement. There's a narrow corridor there. They were lined up to vote. And what happened next? Once again, I'd like to read to you from the sworn affidavit of the Elections Canada official that observed this. He wrote, "The Conservative grabbed a chair we had kept by the door for voter emergency purposes. She then dragged the chair through the midst of the poll 43 lineup and grabbed at the bingo sheets and poll book there. The poll 43 poll clerk refused to let go of the book and said, 'I'm sorry, but you'll have to stop interrupting our voter flow and wait for a break.' The scrutineer rose to her feet in a rage and yelled, 'No, you don't. I'm a Conservative scrutineer and you have to let me see that now.' When the poll clerk once more repeated her previous statement, the scrutineer screamed, 'Give me your badge number. I will see to it that you never work for Elections Canada again.' The DRO told me how this lady, Elections Canada official, broke down in tears. She had to be taken to the bathroom to console her. Voting was shut down. All the people in the lineup, these new Canadians, many of whom perhaps were voting for their first time in their adoptive country, turned around in disgust and left. In the past, threats to our freedom have come from outside. Today, it's a threat from within. Friends, we live in the best country on the planet. Our Canada, the true north, strong and free. And today, we need to stand strong. We need to stand united. And united, we need to declare that Canada, we will stand on guard for thee. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, on the tail end of those remarks, I'd ask you to please join me and let's do a rousing singing of O Canada. O Canada.